Um, okay, time out. I'm gonna just time out for a second. I can hear my own voice coming through your end.
Oh, we need to start this thing over.
Do we need to start it totally over?
I mean, I don't know. I feel like you probably could have heard it the whole time, right?
Yeah, fuck it. Let's just keep going. Welcome to the Good Games Podcast. My name is James.
And I'm Leo. Pew, 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 pew.
Oh boy. Oh boy. What have you been up to, Leo?
What have I been up to? Well, I have been doing a lot of drumming lately.
Ooh.
As you know, I've played drums for many years.
I do know that. Mm-hmm.
And recently I actually had my manager ask me to cover for their drummer in their worship band at church.
Uh-huh.
And that got me back behind the kit, which I haven't been behind in like several years. So after that, I was like, it'd be nice to do some more drum stuff. So I'm actually trying to get my drumming YouTube channel that I've like wanted to do for years off the ground.
Uh-huh.
And one thing, the first track that I want to do, it's called The Drummer Geek, so look out for it.
Yeah, well, go ahead and plug your channel. What's your channel name?
It's called The Drummer Geek.
Oh, okay.
There's nothing out there yet. The first track I'm working on, so it's pretty much what I've been doing the last week or so, is learning Final Fantasy VIII's boss theme, Force Your Way.
Yes, yeah.
That's going to be the first one I upload the drum cover to. That song is like secretly really difficult on drums, actually.
Yeah.
Like now that I'm really listening to it, there's a lot of like 16th note like fancy stuff on a hi-hat. It's pretty fun though. It's really fun.
That sounds fun. I just got back from playing trivia at my local bar.
Still do that, huh?
Yeah, well, it's we've started doing it at our new place. So we've found a bar within walking distance in our complex, which is very nice. We've been playing trivia with myself, my wife, and a couple of our friends. We got 4th place tonight, and I am very proud of ourselves.
Congrats. There's a little mini golf clap for you.
Oh.
Radio golf clap.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I am assuming the list of things you have been up to also includes Into the Breach.
Yes, it does. I have been playing some Into the Breach here and there in preparation for this episode.
Mm-hmm. So you have not played Into the Breach prior to this, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so now did you play Subset Games' previous game, Faster Than Light, FTL?
I dabbled. I did play it.
Oh, okay. Dabbled.
I wasn't like a huge fan, but I played the game.
Okay, because that's me. I am a huge fan of FTL. I thought that game was amazing when it came out. I pumped tons and tons and tons of hours into that game, played that game tens and tens of times, and was super, super excited when Into the Breach came out. But this is more of like a casual, like, you're like, okay, whatever, we'll play some Into the Breach.
Right. I kept it casual. Well, why don't you tell the listeners what Into the Breach is?
That is a very good point. I'm going to back up first and say that Subset Games is a team of 2 people, Matthew Davis and Justin Ma, I think are their names. Their first game was 2012's Faster Than Light, which most people just call FTL. It was a roguelike strategy game where you command a starship and you position the members of your crew on the starship at different stations. So like you would have one that mans the guns, one that mans the shields, one that mans the engines, and you would take your ship and you could upgrade it, give it different weapons, change the loadout of your ship. There were several different layouts of ships, and then you would take that into space and you would have a randomized galaxy with randomized encounters with different aliens, some friendly, some hostile. And it was basically all about navigating this randomized galaxy, and playthroughs were about a half hour to 2 hours long, depending on whether or not you died. And then you would just start over on your next playthrough, and that was FTL, and I love that game. So I was super excited when they announced they were working on... Well, actually, this kind of snuck up on me. I knew that they were working on a game, but I was not even aware of what it was or what kind of... the first I had heard of Into the Breach was like a month before it launched. And I instantly just got super excited. Into the Breach is visually, it looks like FTL just from the artwork, but it is more of a grid-based tactical strategy game that is turn-based. You command a team of 3 mechs, and you are up against a bunch of randomly spawning kaiju. But if you think of all of these like big monster movies, there's all these mechs and big kaiju. I'm talking like Pacific Rim movies like that.
Right.
In those movies, you have all these big fights, and what's happening in the background is like huge cities are being destroyed, buildings are falling down, skyscrapers are tumbling in the background of this fight between mechs and kaijus. Into the Breach asks the question, what if the primary objective of this team of mechs that is fighting this hostile force of kaijus, what if the primary objective was not to defeat the kaijus necessarily, but to protect the buildings? So Into the Breach puts you on a grid where your primary goal for the entire campaign is to protect as many buildings as you can and save as many civilians as you can. It still has a lot of mechanics that are sort of similar to FTL. So you have pilots, you have like little characters which have different abilities, and you can put them in various mechs which all have different play styles, and you can also like upgrade your mechs throughout the campaign. The campaign length is, I don't know, maybe an hour or two. So it's a shorter roguelike game similar to FTL. So those things are in common, but the gameplay is very different. What were your initial impressions? Let me ask you, what was your thoughts on Faster Than Light? And then what were your thoughts on Into the Breach?
I thought Faster Than Light was innovative. I thought it was difficult, but that was almost like it was designed to be.
Oh yeah, that game's very difficult. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, it kind of reminiscent of several other indie games that kind of pride themselves in being a difficult game on purpose. And the strategy but it was unique. It was a different spin, I guess, on other strategy games of the sort. I don't feel like there's much that is like FTL.
Okay,
it felt unique, and it felt like you were kind of like in the cockpit of the Star Trek episode or something. Mm-hmm. It was really, really cool. So Into the Breach, man, I'm on the edge with this game, I gotta say.
Okay.
But in going through our lists now, I realize every game in my list has a very prominent story-driven experience. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that I felt was like lacking in Into the Breach. Like, what you tell me what the hell is going on in this story?
Yeah, like the story layer is extremely light. It's basically just mechs versus kaijus, and you're just trying to save civilization. There's also a time travel thing, which I think is the thematic conceit of it being a roguelike game, and you just infinitely battling mechs versus kaijus forever and ever and ever, and doing that across multiple campaigns. The thematic conceit is, it's multiple timelines, so you're just traveling to a different timeline to do this all over again every single campaign.
But it's kind of confusing because like there's like hints at there being like an overarching story, because like all the people are like, oh, hey, they're here to save us. Mm-hmm. Like they know who they are and stuff.
I'll agree with you there. There is the story and Into the Breach is almost non-existent. And I like the theme of mechs versus kaijus, but I think the theme is kind of applied lightly, maybe too lightly. I would have liked to have seen. So for example, in FTL, the theme is space travel, and there's not like a story, but there's a lot of world building that is done. Like when you encounter a different race, there's a little text box that tells you what you encounter, what you see, what happens, and then it'll give you some like role-playing choices, like do you want option number 1, invade them, option number 2, try to negotiate peacefully or whatever. There is none of that world building or role playing Into the Breach. It's just a straight up, just a strategy puzzle game like that. That's all there is.
I think that's kind of what I missed, and I think even in FTL, like you said, just those little scenarios where it makes you feel like I said it earlier, that you felt like you're in a Star Trek episode. You don't really feel that with Into the Breach at all. Like, I don't know how you do it with that theme, that being the theme, the kaiju mech thing, but to me that was a major part. Maybe it's because I can't play a strategy game unless I feel like I have a good reason like internally for wanting to save these people or
Mhm.
something. Yeah, I felt like FTL did a much better job with that world
Yeah,
building. So that
that's
was one
fair.
thing I found
That's
lacking.
totally fair. Yeah.
I'm a fan of some of the elements that they've incorporated into the strategy aspects of the game and the game design principles.
Hmm.
Things like that they do a little different, where like pushing units and enemies forecasting their movements completely ahead of time.
Yeah. Hmm.
Whereas other strategy games, they don't exactly work that way.
I
But
think that is one of the most unique things about Into the
yeah,
Breach is 100% of the enemy's movements and attacks are totally telegraphed to you. Like you know what is going to happen on the next turn, and your job is to stop it. It cuts to the like what are my favorite parts in a lot of strategy games, a lot of turn-based strategy games, where you
right.
get yourself in a situation where you're like, oh my God, I am totally screwed. How am I going to get out of this situation? Every single turn of Into the Breach is that scenario.
Right. And I mean, that aspect of the difficulty of the game to me is really cool. Like if you go do all this fancy stuff and try to like save this one part of the city, kind of like, oh, I'm going to kill this one unit in this one hit. It's going to be great. I'm going to knock like 3 dudes into the water and they're going to die instantly.
Mm-hmm.
But then you forget that, oh, there's another guy over here who is attacking this square and that's going to kill me. It's
Yep.
your own fault.
Yeah.
So that part I think is very, you can't blame anyone but yourself, and I like that in games. Don't get
Mm-hmm.
me wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There, to me though, I don't like when it's frustrating when you already like know like there. I'm not dying because of my lack of strategy or awareness. I'm dying because I accidentally clicked something and the game doesn't have like a save state that I can revert to.
Oh, wait,
Uh,
okay. So two things. At any time, you can undo a movement that you have made with your mechs. So this works a lot like a lot of other like tactical turn-based strategy games. Each turn you can make a movement and then take an action. So you can undo all of your movements, but as soon as you take an action with your mech, then you're committed to doing that action. However, for each battle in Into the Breach, you always get one undo turn button. So if you start committing a lot of actions and you realize, like, oh God, this isn't going to turn out the way I thought it would, you can always click that reset turn button and take your turn over again.
Well, I know about those, but see, that brings up the other scenario where that happened is I was going through that process that you do in the very beginning of every map where you move around a lot but don't attack.
Yeah.
So I was like moving this unit, undoing, moving this unit, undoing. And then I see the undo button is dangerously close to the end turn button or something like that.
It is.
Or
but also, if you click on end turn and you haven't taken all your actions, the game will confirm, like, hey, are you sure you would like to end your turn? Looks like there's still stuff left to do.
at least 3 times I've like died in this game just because of like oops like it's mechanical, and the game doesn't have like saving like in traditional like strategy games. To me, like I would save at the beginning of the match so I can start the whole thing over.
Nope, there is no saving.
That bothers me. I don't know, I don't like that.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah.
Aside from the I mean, I feel like maybe that's a core feature of the game, the fact that it's kind of like this roguelike game, so you're supposed to do it multiple times. To me, I want to say, aside from the fact that you can't restart a level and like save your state at the beginning of that map, that battle, everything else about the game I like.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it's kind of like a core feature of the game, though. So I don't know. I'm torn about it. Like I think the game is really interesting and everything, but I don't know. Maybe it's just the old man in me is like, why can't I just restart my level if I goof up? Like,
Yeah, but I don't really like that school of game design though, because I think the game is protecting you against what it's protecting you against by not letting you save scum all the time is like in some strategy games, like you move a unit here, you realize, oh God, I'm screwed. Let me reload this save. Let me move a unit here. Let me reload this save. Like that didn't work. Let me put another one. Let me aha! I figured out the solution. But like you're just doing that through like trial and error. There's no strategy there. Like you haven't solved. I mean you did solve the puzzle, but there's something just fundamentally wrong. Like I feel you're like cheating the system if you're just save scumming all the time. Like I love that each choice you make, I mean, with the exception of that undo move and reset turn button, each choice you make is a commitment that you're committed to, and your choices have like real consequences. There is no save scumming. You can't cheat the system.
I guess I could understand where that's coming from, but I would love some sort of middle ground where you can't save during a match maybe, but if you really, really screwed stuff up, you can go back to the very beginning of the map and start over.
I mean, the game telegraphs exactly what's going to happen to you. That was another unique thing about Into the Breach's game design, is there is almost no randomness in this game at all. Aside from there's a random chance when an enemy attacks one of your buildings, there's a random chance that your building does not get destroyed and it resists the damage. And also the enemy spawn points and movements are appear to be pretty random. It makes it feel almost like a puzzle game, or like chess puzzles that you read in the newspaper, you know, like all of the cards are on the table and you just have to solve the puzzle. And that's the other thing, well, sort of interesting thing too, is not every turn in Into the Breach has a true like correct solution. Sometimes there are multiple different solutions, and sometimes there are no solutions at all, and the game just becomes about mitigating damage. Which of these buildings can I afford to lose the most or the least, I guess,
right?
Or like, can I afford to take another 2 hits of damage to my tank? Can I afford to fail an objective? And then it becomes about mitigating damage, which is where the strategy of the game comes in.
On paper, it doesn't seem like that would be very fun, having a game that didn't have randomness to it, that laid everything out.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. There are many, many turns that it just feels like a puzzle. Like I have different pieces of the puzzle, and I know if I do this right, there should be some optimal way of doing this. And most of the time, you get away without damaging your cities and maybe even killing every unit or something. It makes me feel, though, that there's some situations where they're like impossible. There's sometimes
there's turns where you don't know if there actually is a solution or if you're just screwed. Yeah,
and that was okay, but I mean, I think for the most part, I've found a lot of scenarios where it's like, oh, if I just really look at this, there's a solution in there, and like it can be hidden between like several different moves in the right order.
Mm-hmm.
Even like looking at the order of the attacks of the enemy or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's very few instances, but there are some times where like you just kind of wind up in this impossible scenario. That just kind of adds to my frustration sometimes.
Okay,
I don't know. The game just gives me heart palpitations, man. That's really what it comes down to. It's just a difficult game, man.
It is. So is Faster Than Light. Yeah, both those they're difficult. They're hard games. All right. Let's hop into our top 5 countdown for the episode. We're going to be counting down our top 5 strategy games, our top 5 favorite strategy games. All right, I'm going to go first. Now, I have to tell you, I had a little bit of an existential crisis over this strategy game top 5 list, because I don't play a whole lot of strategy games. And to be more accurate, the strategy games that I am drawn to are more of the turn-based strategy games, or strategy games that combine a lot of elements from other genres, like roguelikes or role-playing games. Those are the types of strategy games I'm drawn to. So also, I realized when we said we were counting down our top 5 favorite strategy games, we did not say we're counting down our top 5 favorite turn-based strategy games.
Nope.
Or strategy games that combine elements from these other. So what I ended up doing is kind of spreading the ball around a little bit. I'm gonna take different corners of, because I mean, when you say strategy game, you're casting a pretty wide net.
Yeah, it's kind of a broad genre, right?
Yeah. So I'm gonna give a little love to all of my favorite subgenres of strategy games, and that first subgenre is tower defense. My number 5 favorite strategy game is 2009's Plants vs. Zombies.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, this is my favorite tower defense game. I played a little bit. I went back. I had not played this since it came out in the early in 2009, and I played it on mobile initially, and I went back to replay a little bit of it for this episode. Let me tell you how I was impressed with the artwork in that game and how the artwork informs the mechanics of Plants vs. Zombies. So, first of all, I think it's really smart to have the enemies in that game be zombies because when they start walking across the screen, they're like walking and like shambling really slowly like zombies, which makes sense. Like the theme fits the mechanics. Then none of the way, well, there are like little tooltips on the way your plants work, but specifically none of the way the zombies work are ever mechanically explained in words anywhere. It's all artwork and theming that fit the mechanics. So as an example, there are like zombies that are wearing like track clothes. And these zombies run a little faster than the other average zombies. There are some zombies with like buckets on their head. These zombies have a little more defense than the other zombies. But like none of these things are explicitly stated to you. It's just all the way the artwork just informs the mechanics. And when you look at the enemy like art design, you instantly know how that enemy functions. I thought that was one of the smartest things about Plants vs. Zombies, other than the really rock solid tower defense mechanics. So yeah, my number 5, Plants vs. Zombies.
Nice. Plus, it's also kind of just an interesting principle, right? Like, what plants fighting zombies?
Yeah,
like,
right.
What?
Yeah.
It is kind of cool. Like, I think it's a unique spin on like the typical like zombie games.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I too did something that kind of jumped around between various subgenres of the strategy, bigger genre. My number 5 is kind of a mix of turn-based and real-time strategy.
Ooh.
It is Medieval Total War and the Total War series of games.
I have not played these.
They're interesting. They're mostly for nerds who love swords and stuff, which is me.
No.
I think the games originally began with Shogun Total War, and then Medieval. There's also been like a Rome Total War and some other, I don't remember. They basically, the developers visit various parts of history and geographically interesting places with different cultural backgrounds. So you'll have different types of units. If it's Medieval Total War, you're going to have like knights and plated armor, and the Shogun series has like samurai and ninja. But the game is interesting because you start out in almost like a Civilization game series where it's like this high level view of the globe, like the map, and you can deal with diplomacy between kings and bishops, and there's like intrigue. You can send an ambassador to another neighboring country, or also send like an assassin to kill the other king or something.
Oh,
so there's all this high level kind of intrigue and diplomacy and trade. But then if you get into a battle, so like your units are represented by this larger single like knight walking around, right? But then if you get into a battle, that knight actually represents an army of maybe 500 knights. And so then it changes completely to a 3D map where you control units in groups of 50 or so, and you can tell your archers and your knights to siege the castle from this angle, and then your archers beat your footmen, which beat your horses, which beat your archers. It has like this rock paper scissors sort of 3D combat. So it's kind of a cool mix of high level strategy in the map world with low level kind of real time strategy in the actual battles. So pretty cool.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
My number 4 favorite strategy game, I went with what I think a lot of people associate with when you say strategy game, which is real-time strategy games. Mm-hmm. And I thought about going with the ultra popular and very competitive StarCraft, but I have not played a whole lot of StarCraft. I thought about going with Blizzard's Warcraft, but I think Warcraft is probably more well-known now by its various spin-offs than the actual strategy game. So for my real-time strategy game, my number 4 is going to be the one that really kickstarted the RTS genre, and that is Westwood Studios' 1995 game, Command and Conquer.
Oh, I was waiting for it.
Yeah.
Love that one.
Yeah. It kickstarted the entire genre. I think a lot of the ideas and mechanics are very foundational to the games that we still play today in the RTS genre, like StarCraft. Almost any RTS game owes any of its lineage all the way back to Command and Conquer. I also love the ultra cheesy live action cutscenes. That is another great part of that game's legacy.
Yeah, we talked about live action cheesy cutscenes last week.
We did.
That's a very important part of games in the like late 90s, early 2000s. My number 4, I actually have not played any other game in this series, so it's explicitly this one game. It is called Ogre Battle 64.
Oh, nice.
Love that game.
I've played a couple other games in this series.
All I know is one day I was in like a Blockbuster. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
And I had a Nintendo 64, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And after playing a crap ton of GoldenEye, I decided to check something new out. And being the nerd that I am who loves swords, Ogre Battle 64 had like, this main character, Magnus, who just has like a sword like on his shoulder, on like these like pauldrons, and he's just like such a badass looking dude. Come to know that the game is full of a fantastic story, interesting strategy, which one of the interesting things about Ogre Battle was how deadly things could be if a character died or something. That was like an interesting take on gaming for me. I didn't really. Also, I remember the cartridge being like really heavy because this game was long. It was a long game with awesome story in the medieval sort of realm. I feel like with my list, you're going to just realize that I'm really big into medieval stuff.
That game had permadeath too, right?
Right, that's what I mean. Yeah, like it was just interesting that I had characters that I was really passionate about because I put all this cool equipment on them and I spent the time to level them up, and then they would die and I would like actually almost cry as a little kid.
Oh.
Like, no, man, like, I don't know if it's just because I worked so hard or because I cared about them as a character, but they're just gone. And I was like mind blown. Like, that I think it was like my first experience with permadeath. The weird part about that game was that the strategy was more in controlling your units at a high level, like on the map. Like you would have a main mission, like take over this stronghold on the other side of the map, and you would tell your units to move, and they would have like travel time. Like, there was almost like a weather and day and night system or something, but it was it's within the confines of this one battle, but so like there's different terrain and weather that can affect your units, like their speed and stuff. But once you actually like bumped into another enemy unit, you didn't really do anything. You just kind of watched, and they would duke it out. They would have like animations between like all the characters would be fighting in a turn-based style, but you did nothing. You just kind of like watched them do it. That was a little weird. I don't know if any other games that do that. But aside from that, you just kind of like work on doing that over and over, getting XP, leveling up your units and equipping them with good gear and everything. So, typical RPG tactics sort of stuff, and it was a lot of fun.
Good pick. Also, excellent composer who contributed to that game, Hitoshi Sakimoto.
That is true. Yeah, that soundtrack was phenomenal.
My number 3 is a combination of RPG and dungeon crawling with a strategy game. I'm going to go with 2016's Darkest Dungeon. This game has a reputation for being obnoxiously hard, and it is a well-deserved reputation. So aside from being known for its really punishing difficulty, I think one of the smartest things about Darkest Dungeon is that it really satisfyingly solves one of the problems in RPGs where you have a big party, but you just take your favorite 4 or 5 people and just level them up, and they get stronger and stronger, and there's no motivation to use anyone else in the rest of your party because you already have these 4 or 5 people that are super high level and very strong and have all the best gear or whatever. In Darkest Dungeon, after going through a dungeon, your characters get really stressed out. They might come down with weird afflictions. So if you had a particularly hard time in a dungeon full of skeletons, maybe one of your adventurers develops a quirk where they're deathly afraid of skeletons. And in the future, they'll have, minus 20% accuracy versus skeletons or something like that. So you have, in Darkest Dungeon, you have 2 bars. One is like a normal health bar that you see in RPGs. The other is a stress bar that goes up over time. So even if you complete a dungeon successfully, chances are a lot of bad things will have happened during your adventure. You have to let them settle back down. Maybe you send them to the bar to drink. Maybe you send them to a cloister to pray. Maybe you send them to the brothel. However, your characters best like to relieve their stress. And you have to do that for several rounds before they're ready to go out on another adventure. And I think that's a really satisfying way to solve that problem of why wouldn't I always just take my strongest 4 people out? Because maybe they have some weird problems with skeletons. Maybe they're still recovering from the last adventure. Maybe 2 of your people just hate each other. Maybe you have a very religious character who doesn't like a very secular character, and the 2 won't go in the same party. So yeah, there's a lot of very satisfying party management in Darkest Dungeon, and a lot of really good strategy in forming your parties and selecting which actions you're going to take. It is a turn-based game also, so yeah, really good game, really hard game, but Darkest Dungeon, my number 3.
That's interesting because that's a problem that I run into a lot in RPG games where I have my favorite, party members and I only take them pretty much. My number 3 is, I think, okay, no. I was going to say, I think from here on out, it might just be real-time strategy games, but that's not the case. But my number 3, I spent many summers in school, like, those months where you don't have much to do, staying up late and playing the competitive aspect of the series of games called the StarCraft series, which you alluded to earlier. I'm going to say that number 3 is really going to be given to StarCraft 2, though I want to heavily state that really, to me, it's both StarCraft games are my number. Like, they're so similar and so, practically identical. It's just that StarCraft 2 being newer has a better supported competitive system by Blizzard, and StarCraft 1, it had that similar problem that like the Diablo series had, where it's kind of ahead of its time in terms of internet play, and it was kind of difficult to put it in our like day and age, to play that game now. But this series of games, we talked about Command and Conquer starting it all with the real-time strategy games. What it evolved to ultimately is the StarCraft. That's kind of like the pinnacle of the real-time strategy game. This game now has tournaments with, professional players who get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to compete year-round from various countries. But what's interesting about it is that compared to some of the other games that I'm going to talk about and that followed from the Command and Conquer games and followed that recipe, StarCraft is really kind of a dumbed-down version of all of those. The units are simpler, your population count is a lot smaller, your resources are limited to like 2. But the fun of this game comes from its simplicity, and it's very easy to pick up, but difficult to master. And the win rate between you and another player comes from how quickly or how efficient you are at doing those simple things, StarCraft series is very, very good.
Okay. My number 2 is a good contrast to StarCraft. My number 2 really blew open the turn-based tactical strategy games when it released in 2012. That is XCOM Enemy Unknown. So one of the reasons I have trouble with RTS games is what you were just talking about where you're doing simple tasks and trying to get them done as quickly as possible, where you're micromanaging and macro-managing all of your units. You're trying to get as many actions per minute into the game as possible. That stresses me out because I really like...
It is super stressful, I will say that.
I really like to take my time and like think through every action I'm doing. So playing StarCraft, Warcraft, Age of Empires, Command & Conquer, any of these, it stresses me out because I have to think about what I'm doing. And while I'm thinking about what I'm doing, I know my actions per minute is too low, and then I start stressing. Anyway, that was one of the things I found very refreshing about XCOM Enemy Unknown. This is a turn-based strategy game. I had a really good point to make about XCOM, and I don't remember what it is.
It's good.
It is good. It is very good.
It's a good game. It's a good game.
It's a good... You know what? You know what's good about XCOM? It's a good story generator. By which I
Hmm.
mean, you'll be in the middle of a map, and the enemies will have you outnumbered, and it looks like you're going to lose. But then you realize, like, oh wait, if I just take my rocket launcher guy, I can blow up this wall here, and that'll free up this guy to shoot this guy who was previously pinning down this guy. Then I can move this guy across the map and shoot the other guy, and then I'll win the campaign. Like it creates really good stories, just good emergent stories out of its engine. Yeah, XCOM, a very good tactical turn-based strategy game.
I think it was a good game in terms of gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I didn't like about XCOM was really just being nitpicky. I just didn't like the design decisions, like the art style and
Okay, the theming.
yeah, it was just kind of goofy to me.
It was.
Like,
I mean, it's a little goofy and kind of whatever
yeah,
overplayed. Just aliens invade,
yeah.
whatever.
Here's the cheesy classic like alien tropes or something.
Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. A really satisfying game loop. So you have XCOM is kind of split into two different. You have a base management phase where you're upgrading your base to get more resources to build better troops, and then you're taking those troops into combat and progressing through maps, leveling up those troops, and then going back to the base to build better weapons and better facilities to level up your troops more. It's a very satisfying game loop.
That loop actually reminds me of the Total War series, where you would manage your units and everything. You would say like upgrade them, you would equip them, you would do all that, and then you would take them to battle, and it would like kind of zoom in, and you control the units in battle.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I agree. That's a cool part of that.
What's your number two?
My number two is Final Fantasy Tactics.
Ooh,
One of my favorite strategy games of all time.
I love that game.
Now, again, following the theme here, the setting has a lot to do with it for me. It is like ultra Game of Thrones, man. There is intrigue.
Absolutely.
There are swords. There is like weird old English talk.
Uh-huh.
Game was probably too difficult for me to play when I first played.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I ever even have officially completed that game.
Oh man, I've finished that game like 5 times probably. I love that game.
I actually ended up downloading it on my phone this week. Coming up with my list. So maybe this time. But yeah, the game also had permadeath. So I played this after playing Ogre Battle, and so I was very familiar with that. But it adds an interesting layer. The interesting thing about it is, like you said, that you liked playing XCOM because unlike the real-time strategy games, it allowed you to play more slowly and less stressed and make your decisions and to really think about them. I felt like there are times playing tactics that, even though it's a turn-based strategy game, that pressure is still on. Typically, it happens when some unit is out of position, and then I just know they're gonna die. Like next turn, they're super dead, and then when they do die, they get knocked out, not insta-killed. So then you have like this 3-turn clock, and the pressure is on, man. Like I gotta go Phoenix down that guy, or else I lose that unit forever. So it was a cool mix of real time or of turn-based strategy with this pressure building mechanic. Oh, the job class system was phenomenal.
Very good.
God, I love that. Like you could just take anything from this, little base starting unit to this like ninja and holy knights and all these crazy items and stuff. And you can kind of make your own army. There wasn't any rules. Like, you just do whatever you want. That freedom was really, really cool. Music was also great.
Oh yeah, same composer, Hitoshi Sekimoto.
See, there's something about this guy, man. I just love him.
But yeah, I especially enjoy experimenting with the job system. Like, oh, what happens if you combine a monk and a knight? Like, oh, you can get like a super high defense guy who has super strong unarmed punches. Lots of fun experimentation to be had with that job system. My number one strategy game. Are you ready for this? You ready for this?
I'm ready.
My number one favorite strategy game of all time is 2018's Into the Breach.
Oh man, give it the number one spot.
I love this guy. I really thought about this for a long time. There is no strategy game that I love more than Into the Breach. I think one of the best things that Into the Breach does is its UI design. I think this is a masterclass in how to visually present a game. you can take a screenshot of Into the Breach, share it with anyone else who's played the game, and you can instantly have a discussion about what's happening on that screenshot. Like, everything is so transparent in that game. You can't do that with any other strategy game. You can't take a StarCraft screenshot or like a Civilization screenshot and be like, "Hey, look at my," like, it's not readable. They did such a good job with making everything very readable and transparent in Into the Breach, which is important for a strategy game. And I also loved the removal of almost all randomness and luck. The only randomness in the game is kind of in your favor, so it never feels like you're getting screwed over by randomness. It only feels like you're being helped by random outcomes, because the only randomness is when buildings resist being destroyed. I think Into the Breach is superbly designed, and one thing is for damn sure: Subset Games really knows how to make some really satisfying strategy games. I think Into the Breach and FTL are masterclasses in strategy design.
You know, I agree with you for the most part. Like, it is really, really well designed, and it to me, it does set a new precedent for strategy games going forward. Like, they genuinely do that. Like, that's how good this game is. All right. Number one. This is kind of a throwback to our last podcast episode because it is Star Wars themed. But interestingly, it's the Star Wars version of this game is really just an identical copy to every other game in this series. The game I'm talking about, of course, is Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds.
Okay, yeah.
It is basically an Age of Empires clone with Star Wars skins.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way we phrased it before. I mean, literally, you take every Age of Empires unit and you just reskin it to a Star Wars unit. I mean, you add some, different effects for like blaster fire and lightsabers versus swords and arrows, but it's effectively, they're the same game. But I love the whole series, Age of Empires series. I have spent way too many hours playing these games. Unreal.
So to be clear, is your number one Galactic Battlegrounds or Age of Empires?
So my number one is Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds and the Age of Empires series, because it's the same freaking game. All they did was, when the prequels were coming out, they wanted kids to play Star Wars games, right? And I was already playing Age of Empires, so they just put out a game with Jedi and clone troopers and Wookiee characters and stuff. And when it came to player versus player environment, just like you mentioned, yeah, it can be pretty stressful trying to keep up and realizing, like, after like working so hard on your base and having all these units, that when you go visit the enemy, he has like 10 times what you have. But the interesting thing about Age of Empires was, like you said, Command and Conquer kind of started it all. But I believe Age of Empires has more resources. I'm not even sure that Command & Conquer had like tech levels.
I think at some point they did. I honestly don't remember if the original one does.
Basically, Age of Empires took that real-time strategy formula and kind of expanded on it. So it's kind of opposite of what my number 3 was, StarCraft, which really simplified things. Age of Empires had like 5 different resources you had to gather, like wood from trees, stone from rocks, food from game or farming, gold from mines, like all this crap. So you had to manage all of that. Your population size was, at that time, was like huge. It was like 200 or 300 units. And then you would start out with, sticks and stones and bows and arrows. And then as you got more and more resources, you would be able to go to your main command building and level up to the next tech age. And so that's why they call it the Age of Empires, is that before you know it, you would be at the highest level, and you would have like in the later Age of Empires, you would start being able to shoot like muskets and stuff, and you started out with sticks and stones and you wind up with gunpowder. So that made it interesting for multiplayer, because you could, be way behind in tech level, behind another player, and he's rolling in with all these dudes with muskets on horseback, and you are sitting there with sticks and stones. So I had some great multiplayer. Story was based off of different historical, medieval, I don't know why with me, historical campaigns.
Yeah, I'm pulling this up now. Yeah, it was. They were both developed by Ensemble Studios, both Age of Empires and Galactic Battlegrounds, which probably explains why a lot of the mechanics are exactly the same.
I mean, what I know that people say games are similar. I'm telling you, this game was exactly the same. I mean, there's not anything specific about Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds to say over Age of Empires.
Yeah,
It's
the Star
just that
Wars theme.
if you throw Star Wars on it, I'm gonna
Yeah,
like it
exactly.
more. There is something to be said about building a Jedi temple and recruiting a bunch of Jedi units, like literally like 100 of them, and attacking your friends. I mean, that's pretty fun.
Um, you want to recommend?
Yeah.
What,
Let's
what do you
that.
what do you got to recommend?
So, what I am endorsing today is I have been playing an instrument, and I'm going to recommend it.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Okay?
that's good.
If you don't play
I
an
don't.
instrument,
So you're talking to me. Yep.
you're doing it wrong.
Uh-huh. What am I doing wrong?
Life, man.
Okay.
You got to play an instrument in life, man. Like, there's, you know what, James? I won't say that you don't play any instrument because you are pretty mean on those rock band drums.
Okay. All right.
You're like basically a beginner.
It's been a
drummer.
while since I busted out Rock Band, but okay.
But what I'm saying is, there's an aspect of life when it comes to taking an inanimate object and making this, I wouldn't say beautiful sound always, but making something from just sound is just really spectacular, man. I tell Taryn all the time, when we were young, we were both in band. I played trombone and was on drumline, and she played saxophone. It's one of those things when you're a student, it gets you with a better crowd. You know, you're not doing anything shady after school. You're like focusing on music, and it hits this other part of your soul, man, that just like nothing else does, right? So if it's never too late to learn, it doesn't matter what the instrument is, but please, for the love of God, if you're a human being and you have never touched an instrument, go learn how to play something because it is awesome.
All right. So you're endorsing playing an instrument.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. My endorsement is I'm going to endorse what I was going to endorse last week.
Right.
And this ties in a little bit with what you were talking about a second ago with the Star Wars theme of Star Wars Galactic Battlegrounds. So we talked a little bit on the last episode about how in what was that, 2012, 2013, Disney took over the Star Wars IP, bought that from Lucasfilm, and then shortly around the same time, EA was granted an exclusive license to make Star Wars video games. Yeah, that is the correct noise. In that time, we have only gotten what I think 2 new Star Wars video games, and those are the pair of Battlefront games, which I don't know, like them or hate them. There hasn't been a whole lot of variety, and we've only gotten 2 of them in the last what's it been? The better part of 5 years. So
Sure.
I'm going to make the argument that Star Wars video games have been a little bit stagnant, or very stagnant, especially in the last 5 years. However, if you're looking for good Star Wars games, the Star Wars tabletop space is absolutely thriving right now. There is a similar business arrangement in the tabletop arena where a company called Fantasy Flight Games has an exclusive license to make Star Wars themed games. But they have their product line all figured out, as opposed to Electronic Arts. Fantasy Flight has a Star Wars game for every type of gamer. We've got there are 2 very good miniatures games. If you're really into like hardcore tabletop stuff, there are 2 miniatures games themed around dogfights and fleet battles in Star Wars. X-Wing and Armada are their miniatures games. They have 2 different card games. One is kind of dead right now. The other one is thriving. That is Star Wars, the card game. And the thriving one is Star Wars Destiny, which is a Dyson card game. Very good. Probably my favorite Star Wars board game that Fantasy Flight has put out is called Star Wars Rebellion. It is based on a Star Wars PC game in the 90s, in the late 90s, of the same name. It is a very good 2-player strategy board game. There is also a Star Wars tactical campaign game called Imperial Assault. Also, there's Star Wars role-playing games. There is all sorts of really, really rock solid Star Wars board games and tabletop and card games right now that are coming out. Fantasy Flight announced just today, just hours ago, that they are rebooting Star Wars X-Wing, which is their most popular tabletop game. Star Wars X-Wing is kind of everywhere, and they're rebooting that. So it's a perfect time to get into that if you're interested. So yeah, Star Wars video games, kind of stagnant in the last 5 years. Star Wars tabletop games are the place to go if you are disappointed with Star Wars video games. So yeah, check out Star Wars tabletop games by Fantasy Flight.
I've played several of those, and I agree. A lot of those are very good.
Yeah,
games.
I like almost all of them. Have been just really rock solid games. So what's our topic for next week? Are we doing our shooter? Our shooter episode?
I'm very excited about
what are we doing next week?
Next week, we are going to be discussing PlayerUnknown's Battleground, otherwise colloquially known as PUBG, and our top 5 favorite shooting games. Shooters. First-person shooters, I guess.
This is going to be another tough one for me. Similar to strategy games, I don't play a whole lot of shooters, so we'll see how this goes. This is going to be another toughie for me.
I feel like there's going to be some surprising things on my list because shooters again is kind of a broad genre. There's definitely at least 2 games that are going to be on my list that you would not expect to be on the top 5.
I'm looking forward to that. Well, with that, I am James for the Good Games Podcast.
And I'm Leo.
We will see you next time.
See ya. I also was able to this week in playing the game, I was able to use it as an excuse to tell my wife that I need to meet other women because
what?
I put in my birthday and it says that the most compatible units were people with the zodiac Cancer of the opposite gender. So if you're a Cancer zodiac woman out there, you and me are highly compatible.
Oh God.
That's what the game told me, man.
Oh God.